started. Boom. All right, awesome. Yeah, let's get started here. So, as part of research, thankfully, Ben Fallin had listed that he used to work at Cold Stone Creamery. So, as a former Cold Stone Creamery employee myself, I figured we'd start out intros a little bit differently, because we also found out that Wes worked at Cold Stone Creamery. So, I guess that was part of the criteria to get into this panel. But so, as part of that application process, when you go to work for Cold Stone Creamery, you have to audition. So our audition is not in person, but one of the things as part of the intro, just talk about, introduce yourselves, everybody, and then we'll talk a little bit about your audition skill based on a job that you had, non-production related, that you felt like applied once you got into the production field later on. So a little bit different kind of intro. So I'll just go in order here. Emily, go ahead and kick us off.
All right. I'm Emily Johnson. Currently in LA. Just recently joined a female sports and culture startup. Can't say much about it right now. Hopefully in the coming months I can. But previously worked at the Players Tribune. Yeah, I would say something when I was younger, and this is kind of quirky, my grandma went to craft shows and I had to sell something in order to like help her out. And so I was like Googling, and I ended up selling, and it's like a holiday thing. I ended up packaging up marshmallows and labeling it snowman poop, and then just like sold that for like $1 a piece. And it like sold out every single time. And it was just like such a conversation starter. And so I think like that little lesson in itself was kind of like simple and creative works, and sometimes it doesn't take a whole lot. But yeah, snowman poop, that would be my little audition skill.
That's awesome. Yeah. Off to a good start here. Wesley, good luck following that one.
Yeah, no kidding. So my name is Wesley Galvin, Orange County. I'm the founder and creative director of Viztek. We're a full service agency that specializes in sports, obviously. The only job I ever had that was not production related happened to have been Cold Stone. So that's the only thing I really have to pull from. And I guess the one thing that I really took away from that job in particular was the customer service side of things. When you are making someone's food right in front of them and they're staring at you for 3, 4, 5 minutes, you definitely need to learn to communicate with that person, whoever it may be. And there's a lot of interesting people that come through the door of Cold Stone. So that is probably, and it's not very exciting compared to the snowman poop, but that's definitely the one thing that I definitely took away from that job, was really honing in the ability to communicate to just about anyone. And it really ended up being pretty helpful, actually. So.
Awesome. Ben?
I've been Fallin with the Cowboys. I'm in Dallas, shockingly enough, right? I definitely, I do have Cold Stone Creamery on my LinkedIn, so I'm glad that helped us kick this off. It's always a fun one. I try to keep it on there just for the silliness of it. Obviously, it doesn't pertain too much to sports production, but I did do that for a couple of years. I was actually the student manager at mine, so I got a $0.25 more an hour, so don't get too jealous, anyone there. But I would agree with what Wesley said. You have to deal with people, good or bad. I had somebody yell at me because anyone who's ever worked in food service, you have the tri-sink or whatever, right, where you sanitize, wash, all that. And somebody didn't understand what the blue water was for, and he kept yelling at me about dirtying up the milkshake making. And I was just like, I don't even begin to understand why you're yelling at me right now, sir. But yeah, it definitely helps you understand that not everyone is also capable of being a nice person sometimes. And so sometimes you just have to deal with it and move on to the best of your abilities. But Cold Stone was a fun job. That was a good one.
Keeping that store clean was a pain in the neck.
Yes.
Melted ice cream and the cones.
I mean, there wasn't nothing positive about that place as far as the cleanliness factor.
That's totally true.
All right, Lauren.
Hey everybody, my name is Lauren Fisher, and I live in Los Angeles, and I'm a freelance creative director. I do a lot of different types of work, but a lot of my sports-centric work I've done with a company called the Famous Group. A big chunk of my portfolio is working with them, but I have some other projects and things I've done over the last few years that I can get into a little bit later. Yeah, and my background is in animation. And I was thinking about all the myriad of jobs I've had since I was 15. But the first job I had was making pizzas. And the place that I worked was called Donato's. It's a chain based out of Cincinnati, where I'm from. And every pepperoni pizza has to have 100 pieces of pepperoni on it. And I got so good at, and you would like get the pan and put the sauce and put the cheese and then sort of spin the little pan around and like lay down each piece of pepperoni in like a concentric kind of circle till it got to the outside. And it was so beautiful, so repetitive and monotonous in a way, but like so enjoyable. And as I was thinking about this question, I was like, that is the thing that I think relates to like being an animator. And like, yes, it's fun to like, and then being a creative director and design and come up with ideas and have, different parts moving all around. But at the end of the day, you still have to sit there and do these sort of repetitive and like, get your hands dirty and make something beautiful. And I just thought about you can see me doing it right now. I can like still remember the physical, like making that pizza. And I don't know, that's, if I could show you guys how to do that and we could all make 100 piece of pepperoni pizza right now, that would be what I'd want to show you.
Awesome. Jodain.
So my name is Jodain Massad. I'm with Notre Dame athletics, and I've been here for about 5 years. And before this, I was in Kansas City with the Chiefs for about 8 years. Went to school at New York University, and my coolest job, or my most interesting non-production, was we did a study abroad in Ireland, and I was as part of a documentary course. We lived out in Dublin, and we stayed in the Temple Bar district, which was so popular and had so many European travelers all the time. To me, it didn't feel like I was learning about Ireland. It just felt like I was learning about modern America or a modern European city. So I was kind of looking for some more inspiration or more interesting stories that I might want to follow for documentary or just type of storytelling to flex those out. And I ended up being a part of a class assignment. We went to the Aran Islands, which is off the west coast of Galway Bay. It's like the last stop of Europe before you hit the Atlantic for a long time before heading to New York. And I told my professor I wanted to live there because I felt more inspired in one night there than I had in 6. And he said, well, you have to pay your rent. I can't get you out of your Temple Bar rent, and you still have to make class. And so what I ended up doing was I would take a bus from across the country every Sunday night or every Tuesday night, and then I would take a ferry to this island. And then since all my money was already being spent at my my apartment rent, I had to work at a hostel for a small closet while I was just rest my head at night. But I would spend the rest of the days when I wasn't working at the hostel, I would just explore and meet different people and try to get to know, the different cultures, the different characters and whatnot. So I was a dishwasher. I was laundry. I cleaned the place up. I was like the only American in the whole place. It was pretty fascinating. How it probably influences some things with production. There's kind of always a way. I couldn't get out of my lease, but that didn't mean I couldn't find a way to live on this island. And I did, and it was pretty awesome.
Awesome. And I also realized I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Justin. I lead the digital video department for the Celtics, and obviously very interested in the post-production process and motion design. So our overarching theme tonight is going to be storytelling through what we do here in post-production, and that's kind of going to be the focus. And we'll kind of go back and forth between pre-production, post-production, and try and build it out from there. But the conversation that started ahead of time that we should pick up is equipment, because it seems like it's a question that comes up quite often. So Wes, do you want to start with maybe let's focus on what you use it for, like different programs that you're using on it, and what your system looks like.
Yeah, so we get all of our PCs from Origin, and generally speaking, we've historically have used dual Xeon workstations. So keeping in mind that we're a very 3D heavy studio that does a lot of 3D rendering. We do have a render farm, but sometimes when you just need to kick out a single pass or you're fixing a couple frames, it's good to have that power locally. Before this started, I brought up the fact that for my at-home workstation, I just got a single CPU. It's more of a gaming type machine. And I'm getting some unbelievable After Effects performance out of it, which is kind of why I wanted to pose a question if anybody here has any experience using dual Xeon workstations versus a single core. If they had any thoughts. Nobody? No? Okay.
I am one of those people who grew up on a Mac just until literally not even a year ago. And when discussing like the different like components and stuff, it's so like when I bought a PC, even to this day, I focus more on graphics cards, but like the processor thing, I'm just like, I don't know. I just want like a Mac. You just like turn it on, it works. You kind of know how much RAM you have, you know how many cores you have, like, and then now that I've gotten into PCs, it's gotten into more what kind of graphics cards you have.
Yeah.
But anyway, that doesn't answer your question, but like for me, it was like, for me, the experience was made a lot easier by the company I went with, which is called Puget Systems. They're like made for people like me. Yeah, you pay so much more.
That's the same way with Origin. Their workstations are incredible. The liquid cooling is phenomenal. Are you doing mostly 2D animation like After Effects, or are you?
No,
all over the place?
I bought it because I wanted to start getting into using Octane and Redshift. I've been using Cinema more and more the last several years. My beginnings were After Effects. That was my bread and butter, but now I'm like doing way more 3D.
So you're doing GPU rendering. So
correct.
Like Redshift. So yeah, you're definitely going to want to be heavy on graphics card for sure, and RAM.
That was why I switched.
Yeah, RAM's important too. The more complicated your 3D scenes get, the more that you need more memory.
Yep.
But yeah, definitely. If you're doing, we don't do too terribly much GPU rendering. We do CPU. I'd still say about 75% of the time, unless a client specifically requests that we use a specific render engine. But GPU is definitely becoming more and more important.
Yeah, so it's like crossing over to another side. I used to pride myself on not using GPU rendering, not using third-party renders. Like whatever, I can make it look freaking awesome without that, and like it's so much more efficient. And I still do, but once you start delving into that and start getting these really beautiful renders and much more easily, and so much of the things that we need to create now need to be sophisticated. Like I feel like in the world that we're in, we're always like sort of not catching up, because I think we lead in a lot of ways too, but the commercial world, you know, the Nike commercials of the world and the things that so many of the consumers and the fans are watching have this certain quality. And there's times when like, so it's almost like it really is going to just help you catch up and keep up with all the different things that are happening. But
no, and you're totally right. And the stuff that you can do with GPU rendering, particularly like in viewports, so like Active Shade, it's incredibly powerful. It helps you really speed up your workflow. But then the other thing too is, and I'd love to hear that you're using more than one render engine, because most artists don't. They zero in on one, and that's the only one that they use. What people don't realize is these different render engines have different algorithms and different materials, and you can get different looks out of them. So if you're zeroing in, like we do graphics packages, for example, a lot of them. And sometimes a client will come to us with a very specific look. And well, that look can sometimes be achieved through whatever render engine that we end up choosing to use for that project. So it's great. I think it's great to be more versatile. I mean, it's only going to help.
I agree. That's something I was going to talk about more specifically, is like not like being agnostic, not picking one piece of software, one renderer, one. It's nice to be a jack of all trades and a master of some. That's my, tagline. And then the other thing about having a computer, like having a PC or having the availability of these cards and the, NVIDIA, and it is, and this is another thing that we could talk about more, is like real-time rendering. And, Unreal 5 came out yesterday and everybody's heads are exploding over that. Like there's like, it just seems like the world of real time and these types of things are being democratized more. And
well, it's definitely coming for sure, even on the video production standpoint. I mean, if you look at what they did with like the Mandalorian, the Star Wars show that was done by Disney, a lot of those sets were completely rendered in real time. The behind the scenes is fascinating. It's like a big circle LED screen that goes around the whole set, but everything is generated in real time in Unreal Engine. Benefit being that, like on the Mandalorian's mask, you get those reflections. You're not adding that all in post. So in terms of like set design, that's definitely, it's not coming for us yet, but it's coming.
Yep.
And by us, I mean
And
sports.
If those of you out there haven't seen yet, if you look at behind the scenes Mandalorian, you can see them like on set. They like, or one of the tests they did for that, they're like changing it from like day to night. Like this, it looks like a real scene, like a landscape. And then it's like, oh man, make the scene darker. And all of a sudden the whole world that you think is real that you're looking at is getting darker, just like in a video game when, you know.
They're not bound by shooting in daylight or nighttime or anything like that.
Yeah.
Ben, I'd like to get your take on any render engines and what you do, since you're working at the Cowboys and probably have less budget and focus than Lauren and Wes. You're on.
Hey, there we go. I'm just muting myself on habit. But I was going to chime in. You guys sort of both went with companies, and for my own personal PC at home, I did the exact opposite. I just went on Reddit and like literally explained like, hey, I want to do stuff in 3D with Redshift. And they were like, get this graphics card, get this, blah, blah, blah. You know, I don't even know what they are. I'm not even going to lie. I just bought them, put it together, and was like, hey, that makes things look pretty. So when I came to the Cowboys, we're purely on trash cans, Mac trash cans. So we don't have a lot of processing power. And obviously that takes your third-party renders pretty much away. You know, I think, I can't remember, I think Octane's supposed to be Mac friendly in a couple of months, something like that. One of them is, but I don't believe it, and definitely not on the ones we're on right now. I think they're beautiful. I think for the team side, it's, I was talking to some of my cohorts when Unreal released that, is it 5 or whatever's coming out now? It's awesome, but I just don't know what necessarily somebody who works for a team is going to use that kind of stuff for, because we're just so much of our work is like sponsorship has sold something and it needs to go up last second. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to get into C4D and try to Redshift and, you know, like all this craziness for a State Farm logo or whatever it is, right? So I only really touch those things when I do freelance work, and I love them. I think it's beautiful. I want to learn more of it. But as far as team goes, I don't personally see a real need for it unless you're not outsourcing your, like Wesley was saying, they do a lot of graphics packages. If you're doing that in-house, then sure, maybe I could see that kind of stuff. But I think most NFL teams are probably outsourcing the large lifts, you know? And so I don't really see a gigantic need for it, I guess. I mean, they're beautiful and they're awesome. I just don't know exactly when on the team side you're really going to have the time to dive into that kind of a process.
Yeah, that's interesting.
If somebody can tell me I'm wrong, that's fine.
Well, I think one of the big things about these is that they're so much faster, and it's essentially a real-time render depending on your graphics setup. And so that's where, instead of spending 3 hours on a test render, you've got it up in 5 seconds. And so I think once that workflow gets more into these internal teams, that people are going to start being able to do a lot more internally than they were with just standard or physical render.
That'll be great when that comes. I look forward to it.
No more
I think
overnight
it will.
renders.
It's on the way. Yeah, I think it's coming. The other thing I was going to say about it for me, and this is on more of the production side, like the live action production side, is having those tools in my hands. I'm able to actually previs a little bit more, like more realistic lighting. So if there's a shoot that I want to propose, I can approximate it much more realistically rather than just like lighting plots and reference. I can like have a little, you know, digital double in there and show it a lot more clearly. So that's something that's been really nice the last year or two.
And for previs, Unreal is going to be Unreal. It's going to allow you to make changes on the fly. You know, the client's going, I'm not really feeling how this light is being set up or whatever it is. you can change it and immediately see how that changes your set. So from a previs standpoint, Unreal is going to be great. It's just, it needs a little bit more time to get there, but we're getting close.
So
Puget sent me this squeezy thing, and it's really good branding. So this is good for all of us to know. If you have a brand and you send a squeezy thing, I sit there and squeeze this thing all day. So that's my plug for Puget, my PC maker.
Your
That's good
COVID stress
branding.
relief.
Yeah, I squeeze it's broken. I squeeze the shit out of this thing.
Jodain or Emily, do you want to weigh in on the computer specs part?
Yeah, I can say something quickly. I've been Mac for the last 10 plus years, so I haven't really jumped back into PC world or trying to build. And back when Macs were towers, before they were trash cans, and before there was ProRes, I was looking into all the best ways to, edit uncompressed HD, and I was really looking into a lot of different stuff. But since ProRes and since, you pretty much buy the processing power, and I like the Mac ecosystem, I haven't really spent, much thought worrying about anything like that, and just trying to focus on, cuts only stories, etc. But I will say I was on a call today with NBC, and they were telling me how they do remote editing right now, like how they did it for the Olympics and how they're doing it now during the pandemic. And they told me about an HP remote graphics software. It's making me want to put in our facility an HP as just because we're an Adobe house anyway. And like you said, try to think cross-platform, that if we could have, a powerhouse HP in there that we can remote with audio and frame accurate, master ability to do remotely if you have a fast internet connection from where you are. I think that Apple isn't quite there at the same way that HP is. So we might be looking into getting something like that.
Yeah, my version of everything is pretty stripped down. It's like MacBook Pro with an external hard drive, because I'm just like super running gun. Like we're shooting on mirrorless. We're super like one-man band. So haven't really had to, if there's any other footage that's like red that we get in that needs rendering, it's just overnight proxies. And that's the way we handle it. But yeah, we'll be curious because I'll have to kind of help build out the tech infrastructure of where I'm at now. So I'll be doing like a lot of research on all that, I think, but still pretty similar in terms of run and gun with mirrorless.
Yeah, that seems to be a good jumping off point. Jodain, I know you're very into the asset management side, and I think that's probably a question that comes up a lot as well, is how do you go about maintaining assets once you capture footage?
Well, when we made the transition back in Kansas City, I saw Rob popped on back in 2010. We were constantly thinking about, oh, there he is, look at that stash. We were constantly thinking about the transition from a tape-based system, because you always had a sense of confidence that the tape was on the shelf, right? So you could blow media away, you could make room, you could save room, but the thought of going into digital was like, oh wait, now there's no longer a tape on a shelf. How can we think about that differently? And so kind of discovered or thought of it philosophically to say, well, instead of having a dummy archive where you have a shelf that runs out of room real quickly, let's think about having a smart archive where it's not just a tape, but it's a tape of digital assets that are logged. And so we immediately put our content immediately when it's shot, it goes right into our asset management system where it gets archived before we do anything. And then we go ahead and we start logging it and doing whatever we need to do with it. And recently, and it's been really helpful during this pandemic, it is set up to build proxies immediately on ingest, not just when you're ready to purge, but immediately when it builds. So it automatically purges, and then the proxies are available outside of our firewall. And so our whole operation has pretty much been working because of the ability for us to access those proxies and for them being such high quality. They're just H.264. So, having a fast enough processor to unwrap, because having a whole bunch of H.264 layers or whatnot, it takes a lot on your processor. So it's really important to have a system that can do that. But if we were to go with this remote HP remote graphics software, it doesn't matter how fast your system is. It just matters how fast your connection is. And so you can invest a little bit less on the specs of your laptop that you're using to do the remote work from home or wherever you want to work. But anyway, but back on asset management. So that's the idea, is that you want to put it on a tape. So you want to have that confidence that it's on a tape on a shelf somewhere. So that whenever you delete it, you always know you can kind of go back to it. But in this case, it's a smart tape because it's already been organized in certain ways, and you'll be able to find what you need. And you can always add metadata to the proxy. So you'll always be able to refine and find the needle in the haystack that you want.
Emily, when you're going in and you're shooting and you're storing content on an external drive, is there something that you do? Is there a specific way you name your content to make it easily accessible to be able to search and find?
Honestly, no. And that's probably pretty bad. I mean, the way I log it is not great. But I kind of just do it my own way that works for me, where I just do it by project folder, by maybe if we have a 3-day shoot with someone, then go by days and then go by camera, and all that capture. And then we'll label like what's B-roll and what's the interview and whatnot. But I don't go too specific into like the B-roll labeling of getting into details like slow motion tree shot with, like, I don't label that in depth. But yeah, it just kind of was what works for me, not necessarily what will work for everyone else.
And you're kind of you shoot and edit, you said you're basically a one-man band a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so if someone came up and asked for a shot, would you go revisit your Premiere project or something to be able to pull that footage or find it?
Yeah, I'd be able to go in because like I kind of know how to navigate it. But if I gave someone my computer and was like, hey, find this shot I shot on this shoot day, they'd be like, I don't know how to undo this. And I'm like, well, I do. So I think it works for me. I kind of know just by memory what I've shot and when and how. So yeah.
Awesome. And let's get into a little bit of Wes. If you had somebody approaching you and saying, hey, I want to do a motion graphics package, where does that start for you in the process? Where do you go from there?
Yeah, and well, first and foremost, everything that we do is 100% custom for the client, not just in terms of the creative, but also the building of each package. So no two teams that we work with get the same final product at all whatsoever. And so the first thing that we do is we look at, okay, what's the scope of the graphics package itself, right? Are you just looking for some new rally prompts or noise meters to add to your rotation? Are you looking to have kind of a more or less a starter package that kind of covers all of your bases, or are you looking for something that's all encompassing? We have teams that we work with where we provide 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 animations on a yearly basis. So where are you in that spectrum? So I guess for the sake of this conversation, let's just assume that you're in that middle ground, right? You're a team that's going, hey, you know what? We really want to kick our look up to 11. No, we don't have an unlimited budget, but we want to make sure that all our bases are covered. So that's a pretty good starting point. Typically what we'll do is we'll provide that team with a, hey, here's our suggested build list, right? You know, logo loop, headshot animation, rally prompts, noise meters, transitions, all that kind of stuff. And what we typically ask the client to do, or the team to do, is, hey, take this list and pass it around your department, right? Because what the marketing director might think the team needs is probably different than what the control room director thinks the team needs. It's probably different than what the editors think the team needs. So we really want to make sure that before we even put pen to paper, we know and we're on the same page in terms of what assets need to be delivered. Once we have that list approved by all parties, we kind of go into breaking down what's included in each element itself. So this is before we even touch creative direction, right? We'll go into each element and go, okay, what capabilities does each element need to have? So as an example, let's look at a matchup graphic, right? So pretty straightforward in concept. You have your home logo, your away logo. We need to change the away logo on a game basis, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it is. Okay. Well, what else beyond that do we need to take into account when we're building out this graphics package for this one element, right? Are you a team that has throwback games, for example, right? Do you want your home logo to be able to change based upon the jerseys that are being worn on the field? If the answer to that question is yes, well, then we probably want to be able to change the way the environment looks and the color palette in the environment to match that throwback jersey or that secondary mark, that's, you know, secondary color. Okay. What about sponsorship integration? Do we need to take into account the ability in this asset to add a game sponsor, right? Is that game sponsor changing on a weekly basis? Does it never change? Are there games that have no game sponsor, right? And then we get into kind of just the usual stuff. What's the length of this element, the resolutions that we need to attack, right? Is this an element that's just in your stadium shows? Or is this an element that you're also going to want for social media? 1920 by 1080, 1080 by 1080. And then we do build that out for every single element. Once all that is finished, we know what the scope of the package is. We know what the scope of each element is. Then we get to the fun part, and that's the kind of the creative direction. And our clients, our partners, typically are in one of three categories. On one extreme, we're a team, we know exactly what we want. We saw something somewhere, the TNT package for the NBA. We love it. We want to be heavily inspired off this package. On the other extreme, it's here's our logos and our colors. We have no idea what we want. Surprise us. You would be surprised how many teams are in this category. And in the middle, this is where most of them live. We're not really sure what we want, but we want to be involved in the creative process. And that's where we spend most of the time. And that's where we'll do a lot of the creative direction. So, and it's everything from, okay, is there things that you guys have done in-house that you like? Are there things that you've done in-house that you don't like? Are there things that your other teams in your conference are doing that you want to pull inspiration from or not pull inspiration from? And then we kind of get into the nitty gritty, right? So what's the environment look like for this element or for this package, right? Is it, you want it to take place in your football stadium or a ESPN Sports Center style studio, more abstract? What's the color palette, materials, textures? Is it glossy, not glossy, matte, not matte? And sometimes, it's okay for a team not to have an answer to every question. Really what we're trying to zero in on is when we put pen to paper and we start doing concept art, we want to have a pretty good idea of where the client's head's at, where the team's head's at. And that's kind of where we start. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the question to build off of there is, obviously, if you're delivering 5,000 assets to somebody, you need to be organized in some fashion. Is there some template that you work off of internally for folder structure or anything like that?
Not in terms, well, yes, definitely. And first and foremost, again, every package is designed with the specific team's needs in mind. And then we go and execute based upon those needs. So in terms of like a file structure, it's pretty straightforward. In terms of like proofing, for example, we do have a very robust proofing process. And we handhold our clients every step of the way. Okay? Whether it's, we're working on a brand new element, okay, the client will be provided with an animatic or previs, as well as rendered frames, because we want to make sure that the client understands like, hey, this is how this element is going to animate, right? And then here's a couple frames of how it will look when it's fully rendered. We want to make sure that we're on the same page before we press that big render button and it sits on our farm for 4 hours. So that's kind of how that process goes.
All right, Lauren, let's jump over to you because your animation background and what you do with working with teams is kind of similar to Wes in a way. Can you just talk through the process of what it's like to work with teams and build opens?
Yeah, I mean, it is like Wes was saying that, a lot of it depends on the team and as in regards to what they come to you with. Some have a more clear idea. Some have more robust internal teams that are really coming to us for a bigger production, but they have their own sort of things already at work. So it really can run the gamut in that way. But as far as what I'm always trying to figure out and help teams with is what the underlying story is, like what their goal is for the year, obviously they want to win the championship, but also like what is the unique viewpoint of their brand, the city they're in, the brand itself, their history, where they're going, are they on the verge, are they rebuilding, all those different sort of questions. For me as a creative director, I start thinking about what's really important to me is like what that story is and what, people are going to be able to grab onto, and where that comes from kind of depends on a lot of different things. Again, what they're giving us, if they're just saying, we don't know, we just want something cool. That's really fun. I like to solve problems. If somebody comes to me and they have an idea, I love that collaboration, but sometimes you have to sort of kick it off. So sometimes it could be, and this is a chicken or the egg moment, but it could be like a technique that you want to try that you've been thinking about. So for me, sometimes it's like, man, I really want to do something really cool with motion control. Okay, how does that relate to what this particular team is doing this year? Okay, well they're a young team. They are a storied team. They're futuristic. They're all these things. Okay, how do we take that idea of like robotic motion and how can we bring that to the set? So like bringing those, pieces together and creating a sort of a narrative out of it. And that becomes a basis for all the other sort of elements to grow out of. So it could not just your open video, but it could be other story elements throughout, game day, presentation, social. These things always end up having legs and sort of growing out of that initial base of what is this sort of idea and the story that we're revolving around this year. And I kind of think of it like on the level of like a sequel or like an Avengers film, or like we're making like these short films, basically the open videos. A lot of what I do is the open videos. So, thinking of it as far as story, that's like my big thing.
Yeah, when you talk about experimenting, how do you go about keeping up in the industry? I think that's a big thing. Things are moving very fast. There's Cinema 4D is now releasing an extra update. Adobe's updating every couple months. It's how do you keep up with the industry and push your limits?
I think two things have helped me with that. One is having a beginner mindset all the time and being always like pushing the levels of comfort. So I love learning new things. Like I'm just like a dork. I love like learning new software, just learning how things are made. Even if I might not be the person to actually do something, I have a ton of curiosity and major nerd factor for the business that we're in, animation, video production. And I'm just really so being driven by that curiosity helps a lot, and being able just to like open things up and dabble in them, or just ask the right questions or talk to certain people. Like getting back to the motion control thing. Like we did a motion control shoot with 3 robots. I did not run those robots or program those robots, but I was able to sit next to an animator in Maya, and he's programmed the animations for those robots. And I know 3D, I know a little bit of Maya, but I know 3D software. So when I ask him to do something, and I can sort of be speaking the language. So that beginner mindset and curiosity is one. And then also being, like I said before, media agnostic, software agnostic, not being like, this is what I do. This is my one thing. I am, Miss Shiny 3D, or I am Miss, like handheld gritty, like being able to, your style will form. I think like you like, sometimes when I look at my portfolio, I'm like, what the heck? This feels like a little all over the place. But I do think there's like a thread and like a personality within it, but there's different media. Sometimes it's hand-drawn animation. Sometimes it's just, a live action purely. Sometimes it's shiny 3D. So staying, having your things that you prefer and things you like, of course, and you need to hone a skill. So I'm not saying you should just like do every tool for 5 seconds and then leave it, but dabbling and trying things and not being, hunkered down by one bit of software or one particular thing is, I think, the key to longevity and the key to keeping your work fresh.
That's fantastic. Ben, so you said earlier that a lot of the projects that you take on are quick. They come at you last minute and you're taking them. So what does your process look like once you hear about a project, and how laid out is that project for you? Because you obviously don't have a lot of the back and forth time that that Lauren and Wes have mentioned.
I think it's similar to most people's, right? In the sense that it does. There are projects where I do get a couple months that I can really sink my teeth into and storyboard out and have meetings and do all the sort of typical creative leader kind of ways you go about those kind of projects. Also, it's starting to storm here, so sorry if my dogs go wild. But
same here.
Yeah. But for me, it's really dependent on time, right? Like I really do have projects sometimes where for us at the Cowboys on a Sunday, normal Sunday game, we want to have stuff loaded in the control room, 100% approved, everything done by Thursday, like end of day Thursday. And sometimes we'll get a project that's sent to me like, oh no, forgot about this last second change, you know, at noon on Thursday or something. And so for projects like that, it's really sort of run and gun, if you will, where it's really, I will just go into that project. Most of the time it's not a new project. Most of the time it's an edit or a color change. So it's not really hard, but if it is something sort of difficult, I'll go into that project, move the mask around. I mean, it can be really rough, really dirty. And there's been so many projects that I've personally put out where if somebody came and was like, you did that, right? I'd be like, no, that was an intern. I didn't, I had nothing to do with that, but sometimes on the team side that has to be done because our money comes from a State Farm, a Miller Lite, whoever, and they want, especially on the NFL side, we only have, there it is. We only have 10 home games. Cooper, come here, buddy. Chill. Sorry, but we only have 10 home games. I mean, sometimes 11 or 12 if you're the best team in the league. But so a lot of times that sponsor money drives the conversation where it's like, look, they've given us X amount of thousands or millions or whatever. They're going to get what they want. And as a creative, I think most of us want our stuff to look really clean, really good, or really grungy, right? Whatever the look is you're going for, you want it to look impressive. And there's a lot of times where you don't get that. And that's, I had seen somebody in the chat before it unfortunately blew up there, but had sort of asked about what were some of the positives about working on teams. Some of the positives are that you do get that rush in a way that's sort of fun to be able to go last second kind of things, but also it sort of stinks at times that you don't get to play in the Unreal or the, we were talking about it a little before, but the Redshift and the Octane and all that kind of stuff. And not that you don't get to do, but most of your time is spent in quick edits, fast moving things. And so for me, a lot of times I really do have to just sort of sit down and go, what am I okay with pushing out and claiming is done? Because I honestly couldn't tell you the last time I really sat down on a project and was like, that's 100% what I want. And I don't think anyone really gets to 100%, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like even 90, 95, I think outside of a couple of really rare projects a year where you get to have that time, and a lot of them are spent with people like the famous group, shout out, but a lot of them are those mutual things where we sort of go, hey, we like this, we don't like that, let's tweak this, let me give you my ideas that I've found here, back and forth. And those are the fun projects where you do get to spend a little more time in it. But for me, a lot of stuff is a really quick force out of stuff you don't really love, but it's got to be done,
Rock, do you have any questions coming up in the chat that you want to ask?
Yeah, just so everybody knows, we moved the chat to the Sports Creative Slack channel. So if you want to ask questions, just dump it in the general channel there. Sorry about what was going on in the chat there. We'll move to a waiting room or a password moving forward on this call. But the first one comes from Jacob. He asks questions to any panelists. I know everyone has their own methodology with editing setups, but what are some of your key pointers for your editing process / organizational style? Do you keep the timeline clean with subcomps and nesting? Or are you more of a layer style similar to Photoshop where you keep it vertical?
I personally I'm very into Premiere with the colors. I like color coordinating and grouping based on my shots, and putting them into specific folders as to kind of how I identify them. But generally layered it up. I just think it's almost more visually appealing when I've got teal and green and orange, just kind of all pretty laid out, easy to identify. I do pancake timelines where I might have all the B-rolls strung out in one, so I can just pull it down onto the main timeline. But yeah, it's always so custom to whatever works best for you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of mine is, honestly, I do a lot of editing in After Effects, but that's mainly because I'm, if I'm doing editing, I'm trying to add motion graphics or something on top of it. So I'm a huge pre-comp. I hate when my layers start getting deep. And I think that might just be my motion graphics side coming through from the back, from how I started, I guess you could say. But I'm a neat freak. My After Effects comps are very, folder driven, pre-comp on pre-comp on pre-comp, everything's named properly. And I try to do the same if I'm just editing something in Premiere, but like I said, most of the time I actually edit in After Effects. I'm sure there's a more proper way to handle that. But for me, most of my shots have something motion added or some form of an element that I'm in After Effects for.
Yeah, and one tidbit that I've picked up is I didn't realize that you could actually import a Premiere project directly into After Effects. I was telling Desmond and Tyler this a couple weeks ago, that was news to me, and it comes in a little wonky, and you just have to make some adjustments. But that's really cool. Obviously, they're blending all the Adobe software together to make things work more seamlessly. So let's jump back into talking with Jodain about the process that you go through in creating a project and the storytelling elements that you use.
Well, by the time something hits the editing, hopefully you've already done some sort of paper edit, like on a whiteboard or on a notepad or something, and you're trying to, think about. Hopefully, you can kind of like Lauren was saying, you can think, well, if somebody had to tell somebody what they just saw, but they couldn't show them, what do you want them to say? And so that's a lot of when I'm thinking about building campaigns, that's what I'm thinking about. So I try not to think too much about the tools yet until maybe I know, okay, well, if what we're trying to say is this is a year that in order for us to go forward, we got to understand our roots and where we came from. Okay, that's a specific idea. And if I have that, knowledge base or understanding, and if you want to use the term client, our teams, that they feel a certain way about that, then you're going to have buy-in moving forward if you always keep on going back to that idea. And that might then tell you to, okay, well then maybe the concept, maybe it's a slogan, it's like run it back. And maybe part of run it back is that you do things again and again, and there's repetition, and that's how you get good, is by repetition. And there's value in the doing, not just the winning, right? And then part of it is to get good, you got to remember where you came from. So it's acknowledging the veterans before you, or taking lessons from them. And so there's like a run it back, like, can you reverse things? And so I'm giving that example. We did that with men's basketball this year. And I thought it was a lot of fun to get there. It was a cool process. We ended up doing telling the story of the team through like a record player, because if you think about run it back and you think about it visually, you're kind of thinking about reverse and that type thing. So we're like, well, how can the record player become a storytelling mechanism, or like a DJ become a storytelling mechanism for how we want to get people hyped about knowing what this team's about, knowing what's important to them. And so we used our leprechaun. He was in the news a lot recently. He was a really, really cool dude. And he was like our DJ. So he like flip records and then show them. And then we'd have like that kind of John Cusack angle where it's like just right on the record and you see it's the player's name. And then it like goes back and then you show them doing something. And so by the time it came to the edit, we had done so much storyboarding just on concepts. Nobody was actually drawing pictures. It was just more like finding Google images or things that helped kind of block how the story was going to go. That when we were done with the shoot, I took a frame out of each moment of shooting that kind of represented like an edit that I thought would happen, or at least a segment. And we printed them out in color. And we took over a conference room and we just had an entire wall of all of these frames. So it's just like, imagine a Premiere bin set to the thumbnail view, but it's in real life and you're actually taking stuff off the walls and you're moving them around. And so we had a fun session. We got together for about an hour and we had our outline on paper. And then we said, okay, how can these images help tell that story? And we were kind of able to assemble it. And then I basically made like a image flow, and then I gave it to our editor and I say, like, you're going to make magic doing what you do, but this is the flow of how you're going to get there. And so the editor spent a lot less time trying to discover a story and instead was able to, keep us on schedule or ahead of schedule. And we were able to, at the end of the day, get the product that we wanted. And it all came before we even thought about video. It was all thinking about, what's that connecting idea? What truth could we say that we want people to maybe think about, even if that truth is never told publicly? Like, what's the idea behind it?
That's awesome. I love that. So you have a little bit of a background going to NYU Film School in more film as opposed to sports, and you kind of brought that in, kind of like we talked a little bit earlier about Lauren bringing animation into the live action element of what she does.
Yeah.
How much do you think that has helped you position going through storytelling that way, and how you view post production now?
Well, it's been tremendous. I'm sure, I don't know if Nate's still on the call. Brock can attest to it. The fact that I have a job in sports is kind of funny. I didn't really grow up watching sports, didn't really play a lot of sports, didn't know a lot of rules about sports, etc. But I had an opportunity to jump into the Kansas City scene when they were trying to pioneer something, and in-house production units were a little bit fresher back then. The only good ones were the Eagles, and everyone else was starting to become a little bit wanting to invest it more because they could see the writing on the wall, and they're like, well, we're already investing in video board production, so why are we paying another group to do a TV show? And well, we have revenue that we have to split with all of our players because of the CBA. How can we generate revenue that we don't have to split with players, or more local revenue that we get regardless of what we're getting from a national standpoint? So but I was a little bit nervous about doing that. I was like, man, they're going to find me out pretty quickly. And I was talking to my fiance at the time, and she was like, well, you have something that is unique, so just lean into that. So to me, it's about people, not plays. I love getting people on my team who it's about plays, because they teach me a lot about how the two can go hand in hand. And there's a strong audience for that. But, to me, I want people to watch something and walk away being like, man, I can't believe they did that. Or appear to look at something and be like, they did what? Or someone to walk away with some sort of emotion. So I think it helped me in Kansas City just because it was unique. And so there was some people at the organization that appreciated it a lot. And we started to rely less on out-of-house advertising and more the type of projects that we were trying to do. Yeah, that's been helpful. But, it's having, good people in your corner and being completely honest with them too. So like Rob Alberino, he comes from the Eagles to the Chiefs. And, he asked me point blank, like, what do you want to do? What's your deal? And I kind of gave him the same story, not totally into sports, but I really love storytelling and I really love documentary. And so he was able to pretty quickly get permission or get, funding for us to develop our first documentary show at the Chiefs called Chiefs Kingdom. And so I was doing rockumentaries for a football team. Like I was literally like going to Phoenix, living on a bus with the group that I was telling the story just because they happened to be Chiefs fans, and the Chiefs had a lot to do with how they came together as a band. And it's like a week from training camp. It's like no other probably NFL team like was thinking about stories like this. But it was super, super fun.
That's awesome. Emily, I'd like to get into a little bit of what you've been working on with the T and what you did with the Players Tribune, the T and Bad as a Mother, two fantastic behind the scenes pieces working with women in sports. And can you give us a little background in how you got into those projects and what you learned from that process?
Yeah, so both of those were when I was at the Players Tribune, and I think TPT has kind of had a reputation of doing a really great job of covering women in sports and kind of giving them a platform. And so I was on the editorial side as a producer, and just kind of naturally, based on my passions, I was on every women's piece that we ended up doing. And Bad as a Mother was a docu-series with Sydney LaRue, who is on the women's national team, leading up to her birth. And it started like in her second trimester. So we kind of just dropped in and embedded with her throughout the entire time, all the way through her birth, which was really cool and kind of just uncharted waters as it relates to women's sports and showing that in such a intimate and like raw and vulnerable way. And the T was a roundtable discussion with an Nneka Agumake, Brianna Stewart, Dawn Harper Nelson, Ashlyn Harris, and Allie Krieger. So 5 just really big names in women's sports, and got them all together to talk about some of the heaviest topics there is in the landscape of sports, kind of unfiltered, where it's talking about race and monetization and equality, mental health, pregnancy, and release those as an 8-episode series by topic. And I think the coolest thing about those 2 projects, and they're very different, but it just kind of, the response from each of them is when kind of just the general through line of women's sports coverage in general is you have to invest in it, and you have to give a platform for these stories so that when people are exposed to them, they're like, oh shit, I didn't know that. When people watch the T and they listen to the pregnancy episode, they're learning about it, and they're learning about these women, and they're learning about everything that they endure. And it just kind of helps just broaden that brand. But yeah, those 2 projects for me were kind of on the tail end of my time there, but probably 2 of the most special ones to me.
Do you think working on something like Bad as a Mother has impacted you and how you approach your work or your life?
Yeah, it affects my life. I'm not sure if I want kids. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that one was kind of an interesting series, because it was very much myself and my boss at the time kind of collaborating on it, but I was shooting and editing the whole thing. And the production timeline was pretty condensed in terms of having to turn around the edits for weekly release within a certain queue. And so for me, the work-life balance wasn't necessarily there, but I knew that going into it. It was kind of a sprint, an adrenaline rush, but thankfully, I mean, Players Tribune, they knew what I was under in that sense. So after that project wrapped, I got a good amount of breathing room to kind of come up for air from it. And I think that's kind of important. I think as a lot of creators, we spend a lot of time just going full sprint on a lot of projects. So making sure that we do have space to come up for air after that is important. So for me, it's learning that balance, and that project taught me that a lot.
That's fantastic. So Wes, let's come back to you. We're getting quite a few questions about 3D apps, and I know Lauren's mentioned the importance of being agnostic, but obviously Blender's come out and is free and low hanging fruit for people to jump on. Is there any advice that you would give to people getting into 3D?
Sorry about that. Definitely. The first thing I would suggest before anything is make sure you know After Effects. That's the great starting point. Get to know the Adobe suite, because a lot of what you're going to do on the 3D end will end up coming into After Effects. When you start getting really good, you're going to be rendering out different passes and all that kind of stuff. And so you need to have a good handle on Photoshop, AE, Premiere before you even get into the 3D side of things. For someone who is just starting out with 3D, I would definitely suggest something along the lines of Blender. Get your feet wet. Get used to it. It's a little bit different of an environment in terms of the software compared to what you're probably used to. But if you are really enjoying it and you're thinking that might be something for you, to be the most versatile, I would definitely suggest eventually going into something like Cinema 4D with a Redshift. That is a good place to live if you're wanting to be a 3D generalist. There are a lot of other 3D programs out there when you start becoming more specialized. 3ds Max, Maya is great for character animation. You can get into ZBrush, which is like sculpting. And then there are a litany of render engines. And each one has its strengths and its weaknesses. But for someone who's just starting, my suggestion would be get to know Adobe, get into Blender, make sure you like the 3D, and then I would make the jump into either Cinema 4D or 3ds Max.
Awesome. Brock, any other questions coming through?
Yeah, we got 2 good ones here. The first one's from Nicholas. He's asking, with the chance that games might play with no fans, how are media departments planning on engaging with fans and using motion graphics and film edits?
Sounds like that might be a question for Ben.
Yeah, it's sort of scary for all of us, but we're all trying to just sort of go through it. I think specifically, I can only really speak to the NFL. I've talked to some of my people also in other leagues, but specifically to the NFL, we are currently going ahead with the assumption that the season is going to be normal. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, I mean, as we've seen 2 weeks, a month can be a huge difference, you know. And then there's we definitely don't need to get into the politics side of it, but there's, you know, different states do different things politically, and so it's going to be interesting to watch. I think right now, though, every team's sort of working with that backup option. And I think most of us are working with it as if it's the full option, if that makes any sense. But so the NFL's basically told us we're going full steam ahead. We're going to have fans. We're going to have, you know, all that. But there are a couple of, I don't know exactly what I'm allowed to say or not, so I'm trying to play it close to the chest. But there are a couple of backup options that they sort of told us about that we're sort of planning on. And I know at the Cowboys, we're basically sort of assuming we're going to have to play into those plans, if that makes any sense without giving too much away. I think what we're trying to do first is appease sponsors. And I know that sounds boring and whatnot, and in a way it is, but as I said earlier, at the end of the day, sponsors are what's paying my salary, that's paying my mortgage, that's, you know, I mean, all that stuff. And so I think that's sort of our first inclination, is to figure out, are we going to have LEDs on the ground as if it's a soccer match, and on TV you can see it, you know. That's something I know has been presented to the NFL. I think the NFL is intentionally super slow playing it because in their defense, they can. We don't technically start till September. You know, we have preseason in August, but we still have plenty of time. As far as connecting to fans, one of the things that we just worked on that was an awesome hit, famous group, was the NFL draft. And so we actually did a collaboration with the famous group helping us out there, where we had two super hosts, A-list celebrities. We had Jamie Foxx, who is a Cowboys fan, and one of our former players, DeMarcus Ware, sort of host a first-round draft party, if you will. And a lot of that was sponsor-related. So we have stuff every year. If you're in Dallas, you can actually go to a location where we have a real draft party, where there's drinks and parties and games for kids and all that kind of stuff. And so we had to figure out a way to make it digital. So what we did was we sort of tried to host it, and we had a guy who's obviously pretty humorous in Jamie, and he had a lot of great banter back and forth. We had coaches on. We had Jerry Jones came on for a little while, you know, and so we're really just, in a way, there was a question that I don't know if we're going to get to it later or not, but that was sort of posed when we were discussing this about what gets you up in the morning, what gets you going. As a creative, I think all of us like a challenge, right? Like, that's why we're creatives, right? We don't want to just be, you know, sitting in a cubicle punching numbers in or whatever. And so it's super challenging, but it's super exciting because you do get in a rut, especially in a team where you're like, oh, highlight video. Oh, what's the next week's opponent? Oh, podcast about this, blah, blah, blah. We can't do that anymore, right? Like, we have to get out of our comfort zone. And in a way, it's scary, but in another way, it's really exciting. And I know some of my friends in the MLB might disagree with me because their season's really getting messed up because it hit right at the beginning for them. But in a way, I'm really excited for it because we are super important now in a way for the digital side of things, where this is the only way a lot of people are going to get to interact. If we don't have fans in the stands, you know, please do not quote or tweet me about that. But if we don't, we're really the only way that's going to be able to connect the average fan who even if they had season tickets, now that's the only connection they really have to the team. And we have to be more creative, and we have to find better ways to interact with them. Because I mean, I'm sure we've all seen the reports. What is it, like 3 seconds and you're already on to the next Instagram post, Twitter, you know, like you only have a millisecond to get somebody's attention. And so it's a great challenge, and I wish I had the answer right now. If I did, I would be selling it to everyone, trying to make some money off of it. But I don't have the answer. But I know that everyone's right now really trying their best, and I think what you're going to see come the fall, at least once again, just specifically the NFL, is some amazing content. I already saw it with the schedule releases, with the draft stuff. So much more original, so much more different than the usual, like, you know, typical schedule release, typical draft parties. So I'm really excited to see what we come up with. I hope it doesn't affect anyone in a negative way with jobs and whatnot, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's going to actually come out really well for us in a really weird sort of backwards route. I think it's going to be really exciting to see what we all do.
As someone who is 18 games away from the playoffs, I'm a little jealous of the lead up time that you that you have here, and then obviously the draft was different. But Jodain, do you want to jump in and touch on that from the college perspective?
Yeah, just to kind of comment on the creativity that you're seeing, on NFL teams or even internally. It's kind of weird. I feel like we're learning how to get out of our own way a little bit more right now. I feel like we're doing probably more production, minus event coverage than we typically do by a multitude. And we're not necessarily doing things like out of order or the wrong way. We're just doing them like quicker. We're finding ways to collaborate together. Like our group, at least, has probably gone into overdrive on Slack a little bit, but a lot of the frustrations that existed when we weren't in quarantine, aren't issues as much. And I think one of our guys said that, like, in the last 2 weeks, he's had more conversations with people on our team, like in the last 2 years. And those conversations have turned into like productive work or whatnot. So for us, we're kind of we're one of those groups on campus that's probably working harder now than not. And we're trying to put ourselves right in line with our athletic director, and trying to make sure that we are not expendable in the sense where we want to always kind of create value. And I think we're maybe a little bit motivated by that. But I feel like we're just taking more chances. I think when it comes to how are you going to engage your fans, I think you kind of have to lean into some of those differentiating factors. Like for us, we have one of our differentiating factors is our ownership of TV rights and rights to our home games. And, we're leaning into that in a way that we haven't done, at least to this level, like on overdrive, so to speak. And so I think that's probably going to translate into the live broadcast, if there are broadcasts with limited fan attendance, is to, let's really lean into things that we can do, and then let's go ahead and do them. Whether it's access that we have, or whether it's like literally camera angles that we have, or if it's our archive of assets. In some ways, kind of going back to a little bit of the logging philosophy, sometimes the fact that you have a really well-oiled asset library is content, in the sense of, you go NFL Films, they log things, and anytime, like, let's say a coach is on the sideline and he's having fun with the ref that gets a certain tag, they have a really entertaining show when all you have to do is like go to their server and just search for like referee jokes, and then you get all of them, you put them together, you have some music, maybe you get an analyst to go in and out of them, and all of a sudden that is content. So you kind of leaning into the fact that we have things that maybe people would find entertaining just by the fact of we can do it, and it's not going to take us that long because we don't have to search for a needle in a haystack. So your organization can become your story, or can lead to possibilities of stories. And I don't know, that's kind of fun. We're doing something right now with our graduates who are graduating this Sunday, and our head football coach, Brian Kelly, wanted to make them feel special. He's like, we tell them coming to Notre Dame that it's really hard here, and they've worked really hard. And, sometimes that graduation, getting that stole, walking around, feeling accomplished, you got that academia in you, it does something. It's something that you've been fighting for, and not having that, is something that he wanted to somehow address. And talking about how your assets can become your story. Well, we happen to have video of all of these people from the minute they were recruits, all the way during all of their highlights, to the stuff they did off the field, to how they're recognized on senior day, to the type of stuff we thought future thinking in our production day, which wasn't all like quasars and hot lights. Sometimes it was like story-based production day. Like, I want you walking down the tunnel, I'll be able to use that shot anytime, right? And we're able to put together these like 45-second letters that the head coaches, we'd use Zoom, and all the different position coaches would like be writing a letter, and we're filming it through Zoom. And then they do like an iPhone recording, reading a script that we worked on together, and we're blanketing the entire piece with footage of this individual. So we had 27 graduates. So we have 27 different videos that are going to go out over the next 2 days. And it's all because we had confidence that we were able to do that. So I guess you're thinking about content a little bit differently. I don't think with the pandemic not putting us in this situation, I don't think we would have been driven to do something like that. So, you know, we'll see how the fans engage with it.
Yeah, it's not just for now, it's for repurposing later. The ROI on the return is fantastic. Brock, you said you had 2 questions?
Yeah, we got another good one from Amy earlier, who asks, any suggestions on how to dive further into coloring footage? I'm assuming she's talking about color grading, color correction.
Jodain or Emily, I don't know if one of you want to jump on that, if one of you work a little bit more in color.
I personally learned I never went to school for this stuff. I wish I would have, but YouTube was my best friend learning to color grade. I don't use an additional software. I just do it within Premiere. And I kind of look at YouTube and watch people break down how they create their own LUTs or their own overlays and try to mimic that with my own and adjust it in the way that works. I like to take screenshots from the footage that's raw and play around with it and maybe create my own LUT with it. But really I just do it all in Premiere. There's a lot of different ways that you can go, probably 10 steps deeper than that, but for the kind of content I make for social, it's not really necessary. But for me, just YouTube, I learned so much that way. So I would suggest doing that.
We try to shoot and log as much as we can. We shoot in a Mira, or if we're shooting with a Sony or a Canon, we try to get their version of C-Log or S-Log to have some latitude and flexibility. But a lot of the times we end up putting on some default LUTs, or we have a great relationship with NFL Films, and so we'll ask them to kind of share some of the LUTs they're using this season, so that we can, get the best of what they've learned, as they're, because they are also on the Miras. We have DaVinci, but we just don't use it that much. We've probably done a handful of projects, and not a human handful, less than 5 that have actually gone through the process of saying, okay, now here's your color day.
You think that's time-based?
Was that?
You think that's because of time?
Yeah, it's mainly because of time, and it's also partly because I know with DaVinci getting into becoming an NLE competitor, it's all different. But a lot of times you want to squeeze out the best possible story that you can, and you want to always be able to have time to do things when you get inspired to do them. So that's why we do so much on the front end, right, of logging and of organization and of setting up. When we edit, we like to have certain things on certain audio tracks, because at the end of the day, if you have a quick inspiration, or if a director comes in with a quick inspiration, you want to be able to move really nimbly to kind of work at the speed of thought to make that happen. Sometimes that just means you have to live in Premiere a lot longer than being able to ship out, an EDL or an XML to DaVinci. So I think that's part of it. But the more that you can kind of stay in that space, the more, if you have a late idea, I can drop that in and it's going to work. And all of a sudden my story fixed something that was always bothering me, and I couldn't figure it out until sometimes that's when creativity hits you in the shower or whatever. You're like, okay, I can make that fix. And you can do that more when you stay in Premiere. Your
comment about speed of thought makes me realize that we hadn't touched on keyboard shortcuts, which I assume everybody on the panel is a huge fan of and uses all the time, so you can work at speed of thought. But let's go into the last series of questions. We'll just go through everybody here about the what's next. I know Ben brought this up, and what gets you up in the morning right now, and we'll start with Emily.
For me, I think a lot of us can relate that when you're passionate about something, you just get excited when you've got a day ahead of you, that you're working on a ton of projects, or you're having these important conversations, or you're getting to make something. That's generally what gets you up, I think. For some of us, we're not in this industry for the money. I think it's, for at least in my experiences, fairly underpaid if you're in staff. So you're doing it because you love it. And for me, like I'm getting to build a company from the ground up and be a part of that early on in my career. And it's something that I'm passionate about. And so I think for me, like that's launching that later this year and being able to be more specific about that will be nice. But really it's just, my job is my lifestyle and I want to keep it that way. And I think a lot of us can relate. We're just passionate about it.
Wes?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, I don't care if you're an intern, student worker, senior producer, vice president, athletic director. If you are working in sports, you should be really proud of yourself. There are very few industries that are this competitive. Just looking at just in our Slack channel, we are pushing each other every single day. Every team is watching what another team's doing, going, oh, that's a really great idea. How can we build upon that? How can we take something over here and make something better? So everyone should be very proud. And obviously we're all here. And so all of us get up every day to do something better. In terms of Viztek and stuff that gets me up in the morning, we're unique in that of the higher end vendors, if you will, we probably have the most diverse client list. And by that, I mean, we're one of the few vendors that has the ability to produce really, really high quality content at a collegiate price point. And so one of the things that kind of gets me up every day is really thinking about, okay, how can we take what we're doing for one of our professional partners and do something that's equally as custom and creative for one of our collegiate partners. And that's something that we really focus on a day-to-day basis of how can we service all of our clients and give all of them, even if you're as small as like Abilene Christian University, how can we give that small university something that is equally as custom and as high-end as to what we're doing with one of our MBA partners. And so that's something that definitely drives me on a day-to-day basis.
Awesome. Ben, you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that gets us, I think a lot of people, sort of Emily's point, we're really into what we do. Like it's what we wanted to do for a long time. And as Wes said, as somebody who's hired and continues to hire people, when we put a job out, hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of applications just flown and flown and, and granted, a lot of them are just like, oh, I love the Cowboys, like I'll do anything. But still, it's a super competitive place. So don't ever get down on yourself just because you think, oh, I might not be at the place I want to be at 25 or 35 or 40, whatever it is, right? Like we all have just driven ourselves to be there. I think a lot of it is competition. And I don't mean it in a negative way. I think a lot of people take competition as like you want to beat somebody. But like I love when we make something really cool and the Eagles guy reaches out or the Vikings or the Celtics guy, whoever it is, and it's like, that was really cool. Who'd you go with? What'd you do? How'd you do that? Because it's competition to one up, but it's not a negative competition, right? It's not like, gotcha. It's not like, oh, we really stuck it to you this year, Eagles. It's a friendly competition. That gets me up. I love being able to see something we produce that, and I'm not even just talking social media, but like it gets liked, right? Like I don't mean like literally liked, but people enjoy seeing it. That was when I was at the NBA area, I worked for the Pelicans for a long time. That was one of the things I loved about the NBA is I could come up with an idea, sell it to somebody, and throw it on a video board by the end of the night. Like it didn't have to go through tons of channels, tons of, obviously it wouldn't be the greatest thing in the world if it was that night. But I love that kind of competitive drive to constantly come up with something new, constantly come up with something creative, and really take the next step. I was looking at stuff the other day that I had made 8-10 years ago now. It looks terrible, obviously. Like it's just not good anymore. But at the time, it was good. There was nothing wrong with it. And so I think it's always important for us to sort of look back sometimes and go, because you always feel like we're sort of treading water. At least I do a lot of times. But a lot of times it's the small little steps day by day by day that 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road, it's really impressive how far you've come. And that doesn't, Abilene Christian, Dallas Cowboys, Phoenix, it doesn't matter where you're at. That's true for everyone. And so for me, that gets me going, knowing that we can improve every single day and make something cool.
Lauren?
Yeah, I'm totally vibing. I'm like, I think we can all relate to each other in this way, in this path that we're on, in the world we work in. We're all passionate about what we do. And for me, I loved sports as a kid. I was obsessed with Michael Jordan and basketball. And then I sort of, as I got a little older, I let that go and got into art and music and then eventually filmmaking. And documentary filmmaking was the first thing that made me freak out when I was at the college level. I was studying photography, but I got into documentary, and then I got into animation. And then I sort of like, just looking back at the path that I've gone on, once I started doing work in this field in the sports world, I had done broadcast design for 6 years before that for, television and stuff. But once I started doing work in this particular field, my imagination just exploded. And I think it's because it was like I was connecting back with my little child, my inner child. And I think all of us here probably grew up watching sports, or even if you didn't, you connect to the human side of it. But for me, I've had this really interesting journey where my seemingly disparate paths have come together to make this really great career. Over the last year, I stopped doing open videos as much last year because I ended up doing a pilot for a documentary series that got picked up, and it's this mix of animation and live action, and I got to follow that, pursue that part of what I love to do, which is storytelling and documentary, and combine it with animation, and it was sports. And so what gets me up every day, and I think I have the same sort of message, is that excitement of what's next, I'd never worked on a TV show before where I was this lead creative person. I'd never done this. It's always the new thing. And the beginner mindset, don't let anything in your mind or your voice that tells you don't know how to do that, you've never done that before, who are you? It's all BS. You can do, as long as you're being driven by your truth and your creativity and what you are driven to do and curious about, do it. Don't be held back by it. Find a way to make it. Look up the YouTube video, write an email to somebody, reach out and just pursue it and be audacious in that way. That's always my thing, is what can I do today that's gonna maybe scare the crap out of me a little bit? And that's, if I'm scared, then I know I'm doing the right thing.
Jodain, you get the tough task of following all that up.
Okay, well, I'd say lately I've noticed that I found most enjoyment trying to, help somebody see something the way that I am seeing it, or the way I want to explain it. I find a lot of that is in campaign building. So one of the projects that I've spent some time on recently, it doesn't even have much to do with video. In fact, right now it has zero to do with video, but I'm trying to design the next football equipment truck. How can I make football equipment truck become a storytelling device? How can I think differently about it? And then how can I, whether it's Bluetooth inventory tracking, whether it's semi-autonomy on driving, on GPS, whether it's digital signage on the side, or making tours. How can we think about the ways we think about stories in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, thinking about touch points, building characters? How can we do that in other ways? And in this sense, can I use a device or a truck in this situation that has to do something and help it become, something that people talk about without ever having to visit the truck, right? And so, but a lot of that is how do you translate your excitement about something to somebody else? And so that kind of gets into that campaign building, mindset. All right, I got to keep my message simple. Everything has to build off of it. I find almost thinking about rhetoric a lot more. And then sometimes video is the way to get things done. Because if you want to do something, sometimes the way people pay attention to it, you can probably translate your ideas most efficiently that way. And so I've been really happy to use my phone a lot to do pilot tests, to do sample projects, because a lot of times I've saw some stuff on the channel about how to get out of the creative rut. A lot of it is you just got to do something. And so a lot of, you don't have to have the lack of access to equipment all the time stop you from trying out a concept really quickly, or just trying something fun or using your kids or something in that way. So I'll do mock-ups a lot now, and I used to almost never do that. So I'll do a lot of previs, but not like fancy previs. We're talking about real-time, lighting effects and whatnot, but like nasty previs, like with like a grainy phone, and I'm just trying to help people see something from one step to the next. So I think that's been kind of fun. And as far as what takes you to the next thing, I think I like choosing projects that if I'm somewhat successful on the other side of it, that I'll be kind of impressed, as if, thinking if somebody else did that would be impressive to me. So I don't know, my dad said you can never impress others until you can impress yourself. And so I think I often put myself in a position where I think I might be able to impress myself. It's kind of a curse though.
Yeah, chasing your tail sometimes, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much, all of you. Appreciate all your insight and being willing to jump on and have this conversation. I think it was super insightful from my perspective too. So I'm going to toss it over to Desmond now to close it out.
Yeah, just going off what Justin was saying, I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. Justin, you did an amazing job moderating tonight's panel. But just all of our panelists, thank you for spending a couple of hours with us tonight, just dropping some knowledge. You all brought incredible background and expertise to this panel, so I really applaud you on that. Just one of the closing notes that I do want to say is a lot of what resonated tonight was, what led us to this industry is the passion, storytelling, of animation, editing. We all get to use it on a daily basis, and it's all revolved around sports. I think to the young professionals out there, you might not be working for the dream team you want to work for right now, but we all have to start somewhere, and you work your way up the ladder. So I think it's just really important to just focus on the passion of what fuels you to create that content day in and day out. So keep your head up. I know it's a tough time we're going through right now, but I think we're all getting through this together. And I think that's what makes our community so special. So feel free to, if you ever have any questions or, you want to share some work, use the Slack community as an outlet, and we're always willing to help you guys out. So definitely urge you to do that. So next week, we do have a graphic design panel, which will be a very great panel. We have 5 individuals who join us on that panel next week. So we'll drop the panelists in the Slack channel, so look out for that. But yeah, just wanted to thank everyone for participating tonight, and we'll hope to see you guys next week.
Thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes.